Because I think sometimes we think when we have to build strong relationships, we can no longer have tough conversations with our vendors, right? Like everything has to be great. But really, that's not the case. Actually, if the relationship is stronger, you can have even higher expectations because there's that relational capital there. Oftentimes, just like in your personal life, if you have a relationship with someone, they want to do even better for you because there's a relationship there that isn't just surface level.
What are the secrets that drive the businesses you love or nonprofits you admire? Join us as we uncover the surprising ideas at the intersection of causes and brands. I'm Dave Raley.
And I'm Carly Berna. Each episode, learn from leaders of nonprofits and companies that will give you insights that you can put into action. This is the Purpose and Profit Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Imago Consulting, an advisory firm that helps nonprofits and businesses grow through innovation. Find out more at imago.consulting. That's IMAGO.consulting.
Well, welcome to this week's episode of Purpose and Profit. Dave, I'm always excited when it's just the two of us and we just kind of get to ramp on something.
Oh, yeah.
This week, we're going to talk about an article that you wrote recently, and we'll put a link in the show notes for those who want to read the whole thing. But as we've talked about before, I was a nonprofit leader for 10 years. Dave worked in an agency with nonprofits for way too many years. Sometimes we call him the grandfather of digital fundraising. But we both worked with nonprofit leaders for many decades if you combine our careers together. So this specific episode is about the 7 habits of highly effective nonprofit leaders, which we hope is helpful to those of you who work in the nonprofit space. And even those who don't, I'm guessing you'll be able to take something from this. We don't assume that everything we're saying will apply to both for-profit and nonprofits, but I'm guessing there will be something in there that you can use in your leadership. So before we get started, Dave, anything that you want to just say about, what kind of made you think about writing this and where did you come up with these 7?
Yeah. Well, first of all, nonprofit leaders, there's 2 phrases there I think some people may associate with it or not. Nonprofits, obviously. And I do think this is relevant to business leaders, but just to be clear, all of this is from research and experiences that I've had on the nonprofit sector. And then leaders, I think some people listen to this and they think, well, I'm not a leader. And the truth is that leadership is influence. And so if you have influence, this is relevant to you. But to your question, Carly, I have worked with over 100 nonprofits. I counted recently. We'll just leave it at over 100. And I've just been exposed to a lot of different leadership styles and skills and gifts. And this was probably 6 or 7 years ago that I first started to think about this. Like, what are some of the common traits between leaders that I've really admired, that I've seen not only effectively lead their teams, they were good leaders, air quotes, but they also were growing their organizations. And so over that period of time, I pulled together this list and as you mentioned recently, a few months ago, put out an article on the 7 habits of highly effective nonprofit leaders, of fundraisers. And ultimately, it's just traits that I see among that are common.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we're going to walk through each of the 7 and add any experiences we've had with them as well. But let's just start with the first one.
Yeah. So the first habit of a highly effective nonprofit leader is that they understand how to move from data to strategy. What do I mean by that? I mean that nonprofit leaders seek to continually understand where they're at today and determine where they should go next. A friend of mine who we've had on a previous season, Bob Beal, once said to me, he's worked with many nonprofit boards, Carly, and one of the things he said to me is that the board fundamentally only cares about 2 things. And I was like, all right, Bob, what do you got to say about that? 2 things. Number 1, that the leadership knows what's going on. And number 2, that they have a plan to do something about it. And one of the things that I've really admired about nonprofit leaders that I've worked with and that I've seen that are really effective is that they have this ability to gather and understand the data, but then also develop plans to do something about it. And so that's the first habit, is understand how to move effectively from data to strategy.
It's interesting. Early on in my nonprofit career, I was sitting with my former CEO and my former boss at the time, this was like nearly a decade ago. And I remember this person was showing some data, but there was no strategy with it. And the CEO was like, "What? Who cares?" Like it was actually like how many views on like an ad or something. And he was like, "Who cares how many views there are? Like how many people clicked through and how many people gave their name and how many leads did we get?" And there was just no answer. It was just like all about views. And that's what this makes me think of, is like data is one thing. Like, oh, you got 1 million views on the ad. Well, that's great. But what did that turn into? And what's the strategy now to convert those people to donors? And on it goes. But I think you're right on. Like, it just makes me think that, just the data is nothing until you can take an actionable insight away from it.
Well, and I think we've all been in those, well, I won't say we all, but if you're in nonprofit leadership and if you've been doing that for a while, you have sat in the meeting where 3 hours in and slide 65, of data, and you're like, wait a second, what are we talking about? And what are we supposed to do about this? Right. And if you've been in board meetings, you've been in those moments too. So it's what's going on, and then how do we convert that into what do we do about it?
Yeah, exactly. All right. What's number 2?
All right. Number 2 is they find what's working and do more of that. And this comes from another gentleman that I worked with for many years. His name's Rory Starks. Rory, if you're listening to this, hello. Very wise gentleman, worked at World Vision, led all of marketing for World Vision for a number of years. And then I had the opportunity to work with him for a number of years as well. And it's funny, I used to travel a lot with him, and I, ask him questions, what wisdom could I draw? And one time he told me that he said, and he didn't set it up this way, but basically his secret to success was the, conversation. And he said, Dave, it's pretty simple. Like, it's not complicated. I just find out what works and I do more of that. And I was like, wait a second, really? Like, one, that's a little bit of a like, okay, really? That's it? But then I looked back at his career, and I've had many conversations with him since. And it's such a powerful insight. So often as nonprofit leaders, we get caught up in putting out fires and dealing with the latest crisis of the moment. And we've got this big transition and we've got to work on that thing, that it can be really easy to actually, one, make things overcomplicated. And then 2, totally miss what's working well. And so Rory's point was, I look for what's working. Even in a sea, by the way, of discouraging information or this program's not working, he said, what's working and how do we do more of that? And so he would find a program, just as a practical example, that was working, and say, okay, well, what if we doubled the investment in that? What if we quadrupled the investment in that? And he would just continually, he was like a bulldog at like, how do we not just be satisfied with the areas that are working, but to double down, quadruple down, so on and so forth, to really maximize what's working.
Yeah. Every time you say one of these, I'm thinking, I hope I have a great example to share, but all I can think of is like the opposite of these things.
Which is great.
Yeah. So I agree with you, but I've actually sat in a meeting with Rory when we're looking at all the channels, and one of them is white mail, which if you're a nonprofit leader, you know what this is. It's just like any mail that comes in that you don't know where it comes from. It's just like white mail. And that channel was doing really great. And the recommendation was do more white mail.
Do more of that.
Which is like, you can't, it's like, that's like the people that see the billboard and you have no idea that they see it, like do more billboards. But yeah, I think absolutely you have to pay attention to what's working and do more of it. When I was in the nonprofit space, we started doing digital fundraising like on a really small level. And I think that's the other thing is, and I'm guessing, because I didn't read ahead, but I'm guessing one of your habits here is about innovation. But if you're only focusing on the things that are doing well, you might miss out on the smaller opportunities too. So I think you have to test and see what's working on a small scale and then start pouring into that too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to miss the wave of innovation, as you may put it, Dave. But I think like defining what success is or what does working mean is another thing. Because you could say like those ads I was talking about earlier, well, they're working because there's a lot of views. But it's like, what does working mean?
Right. Being very clear on your outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. So that you can determine what does it's working mean and do more of that. All right. What is number 3?
All right. So if you're keeping track, number 1 is understand how to move from data to strategy. Number 2 is find what's working and do more of that. The third habit for highly effective nonprofit leaders is they leverage their natural resources. Now, what I mean by that is over the years, I've noticed with almost every organization I've worked with, there's this sense of when you get to talking about their sector, there's this sense of, well, we could do better if we had such and such celebrity founder like that other organization has, or we had such and such an endowment like that other organization has. And so it's very easy. It's a human trait comparison, right? To say like, man, if we had blank. But the reality is, A, you don't. And B, every organization has its own natural resources, meaning these are things that are unique to you. And by the way, as individual leaders, we have our own natural resources, but also as organizations. And so in the post, I outline a couple examples. So I'll just give you a few types of natural resources you might have, because I think what nonprofit leaders can do is they look at what other people have that they don't have, and they kind of miss the things that are right in front of them that they take for granted, that other people are saying, I would kill to have that, natural resource. So one example of a natural resource would be your organization's culture. Sometimes an organization's culture, its DNA, can be absolutely leveraged. Some organizations are highly entrepreneurial and have a high tolerance for risk taking. Some organizations, for example, the culture is all about advocacy and making change, right? I don't know what your culture is, but how is your culture a natural asset? I'm going to skip a couple here. Another natural asset would be relational. Some organizations are very connected, like they're either connected sort of in the program side with other organizations that are doing similar work. Some organizations are really good at just creating relationships. So that's another one. And then just to pick another one at random, network. Some organizations just have distributed networks. They might have a really large staff. Most organizations don't have that, but some will have, essentially boots on the ground where their content is broadcast really widely, or they have like different, headquarter offices around the country, around the world. And so there's a couple different examples, and you'll probably be thinking of some yourself, but the point here is that effective leaders seek to understand what their natural resources are. What have they been given personally and organizationally, and they tap into those.
Yeah, I can say for myself, I worked at a media organization where we had, we produced television shows. And so we had so much content. And our agency at the time would say to us, like, there are nonprofits that would kill to have this much content just being like cranked out. Like, we are trying to get them to write content or to make content or make videos or whatever. And so I don't know if we did the best job ever leaning into that. But when I hear you say this, I think like we had a lot of content and we did reproduce it in other ways, like cut it up and add captions and all of that kind of stuff. But like you talked about the comparison game, I think sometimes we look at other organizations, whether you're a nonprofit or not, and be like, oh, they're doing this cool thing over here. Like, we need to do that, instead of, what unique strength do we have that we can focus on? And then they might be looking at us and saying, oh, they have all this content. We need to make more content.
One of my favorite things, Carly, because about 75% of my clients today are nonprofits, so it's helping them grow and understand innovation, is to find those little golden nuggets. It's like, I have one client, I do a lot with recurring giving. I have one client that has more than 80% of their donors are on EFT, like give via check automated funds transfer, which if you know the nonprofit space, that's very rare. Most nonprofit recurring donors are on credit card, maybe even check, depending on how old your program is. And this organization, that's a huge natural asset. And so there are some strategies that we've done to really leverage that. Likewise, another organization I work with has a very significant content arm, and they have a huge following, but they have not introduced this idea of recurring giving like they could have. And so now they're starting to do that and seeing immediate fruit. Well, if I had given either of those organizations the opposite advice, right? Tell the media organization, well, let's work on EFT, although we should. They would not nearly be as effective or see the kind of fruit if we didn't leverage their natural assets. So that's the third habit, is to leverage your natural resources.
All right. Well, let's move on to the fourth.
Number 4 is effective nonprofit leaders manage the present while inventing the future. Yes, Carly, you were waiting for the innovation point. But this is a quote that I heard many years ago from an incoming new CEO, not at a nonprofit, but at a company. So this is a purpose and profit point here. And this was the new CEO of Coca-Cola, massive global multinational company. And the interviewer was asking her, he said, what do you think the biggest challenge you face as a incoming leader of this massive, entity? You can imagine the breadth of potential answers she might have given to that question, Carly. But she said, I think the biggest challenge that I face as an incoming CEO is the same challenge that every leader of every organization faces. And that is to manage the present while inventing the future. And Carly, in that moment, this was maybe a decade ago, I was like, that's what I do, which is, as a leader of the organization, my job is not just to pay attention to today and make sure the systems are working well and that we're executing or whatever, but also to invent the future. Likewise, if I spend all my time in the future, then I'm going to miss what's happening today, and my organization may potentially lose out. And the last thing I'll say is that I've noticed that leaders tend to have a tendency one way or the other. Like, there's no wrong or right answer. I tend to be a little more future oriented, as you can imagine. And so sometimes today doesn't get enough attention. But I know also plenty of leaders that are more focused to today and making sure today is operationally effective and we're doing a great job and we're taking advantage of the opportunities in front of us, but they're missing the future. And the truth is that highly effective leaders balance current, today, operational effectiveness with future planning and looking into the future.
Yeah. Someone at our agency many years ago said to us that when we think about our channels, like our fundraising channels, we need to think about it like we are diversifying our financial portfolio. And so you have some that are like, your bonds, they're just kind of stable and they're just steady. And then you have some that are like the stock market, and they're like going up and down, and you might take some more risk. And then you have like penny stocks and, on and on. But it was a really great way to think about diversifying, which makes me think about what you're saying here, because there's those channels that you're always going to invest in. Like, you have to have some level of presence there. But then there's the ones where you're kind of like testing it out. Like, you buy 5 stocks of Apple and you're like, how's this going to do? And then like, as it works, you slowly invest in it. But I love this idea of diversifying. And I think that's how you can innovate. Like, you can think about, this is just a made up number. You probably have a better number, Dave, but like, take 10% of your budget and put it in like quote unquote R&D or innovation, and like just invest in new channels and see how they do. And then if they work, continue to build into that future while continuing to be in the present.
Yeah. Well, ironically, our next point, we will talk not about a percentage, but about how to think about taking those risks. But in this case, I want leaders to look at themselves and if you're listening to this, ask yourself the question, am I future oriented or am I present oriented? And the answer is both, by the way. I'm not, there's no like, you're not all one or the other, but if you're going to err, err, if you're going to err, what side are you going to err on? Are you more hey, my head's in the future. I'm thinking about what's coming up next. Oh, I hope everything's going okay today, which is where I tend to be. Or if you're going to err, are you more, nope, my head's down. I'm making sure we do what we need to do today. But there could be a train hurtling down the tracks towards me and I couldn't see it, right? And so the key is to understand where your tendencies are, and then to surround yourself with people, with advisors, with staff, with vendors, whatever it looks like, to surround yourself with people that can help you with your blind spots, candidly.
Yep, that's great. All right, what's the next one?
All right, so habit number 5 of highly effective nonprofit leaders is they act with courage and they take calculated risks. One of my favorite definitions of courage is that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. It's the ability to confront fear, pain, uncertainty, or challenges, even when the outcome is uncertain.
Or the income is uncertain.
The income, that's true, actually. Fair enough. Freudian. The most effective leaders I've known take risks. There's no way you can get through life or leadership without taking risks. But here's the key, Carly. When you look at the risks when I look at the risks that I've seen leaders make, that I'm like, wow, that was awesome. None of those risks were, quote unquote, betting the farm, which for young people, I think means not putting all of your eggs in one basket, right? You're not, the risk to the organization or to your leadership are not fatal or catastrophic if they don't work. In fact, Jim Collins, who wrote a book, he's written many books. He's most famous for Good to Great, but he also wrote a book called Great by Choice, which was a accompaniment. And he talked about a concept that he called, that I think is really helpful here about risk taking, called first bullets, then cannonballs. So now we're in the pirate metaphor, if you're keeping score, Carly. But it's basically this idea that when you're first discerning something, or you think there's a direction to go or a new program to develop, the idea is you first fire bullets. Bullets represent low cost, low risk, low distraction experiments. And you just use these bullets to figure out what will work, calibrating your line of sight by taking these small shots. And the pirate metaphor is, cannonballs are really expensive and you only have so many of them and you've got to make them count, right? And so apparently in pirate days, what they would do is they would fire small bullets first to figure out the trajectory and, make sure they were going to hit the other ship before they fired a cannonball. So then once you have that validation, you fire a cannonball, and that's a concentrated resources into a big bet. But it's a big bet because you've already fired the bullets and you have a sense of where things are going. And so, yes, the most effective nonprofit leaders I've ever known regularly take risks. They try things that are not certain, and then they make their next decision based on how that last thing went. But they're not betting the farm. And I think so often risk seems like it has to be this like cavalier, we could die, everybody, kind of thing. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Like, I take risks all the time. I posted something on LinkedIn last week that was, in the end, not risky, but it was like, hey, maybe this will work, maybe it won't, and then I'm going to learn from that and I'm going to calibrate from there. So take risks, take calculated risks.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to what I was saying earlier, but we used to do a lot of testing. One of the things you talked about was, your natural resources. And the organization I was at least in the marketing and fundraising team, was very entrepreneurial, which was great because then we were able, I could come up with any idea. And as long as I said the words, let us test it, we were allowed to do it.
It's like, go for it.
Yeah. It was like, yeah, test it, get a small budget and test it. And that's where I think this idea of calculated risks come in. What does this mean? It could mean we're going to do an SMS campaign. We've never done a texting campaign. It's going to cost $3,000. Let's see how it does. That's a really small example. Or just, new kind of media channels that you haven't done before, like CTV or YouTube or something. You can do those on such a low spend. It's not like back in the day when you had to send a direct mail piece to 1 million people. You can do these on such a low spend that are very low on the risk scale, and then determine if you can increase that and grow that.
Yep, absolutely. Is your faith-based organization searching for a leader who truly aligns with your mission? Faith Search Partners is the premier executive search firm dedicated to faith-driven organizations. With over 130 years of combined experience and a 98% success rate, they will guide you through every step of the process, ensuring that you find the right leader to drive your mission forward. Trust the experts who live their faith. Visit faithsearchpartners.com today to learn more.
Okay, 2 more left, Dave. What is the number 6?
All right. Habit number 6 for highly effective nonprofit leaders is that they bring the best out of their partners. I've been one of those partners for many years. And so I've seen when nonprofit leaders are really effective at bringing the best out of their partners. And it really comes down to treating them as a part of the team. It's super easy, especially if you're trying to get the best price and negotiate and keep your quote unquote vendors at an arm's length. That doesn't work in the long term. It doesn't bring the best out of the people that you're working with. So I always try to think about it this way. Who am I working with, whether or not they're on my quote unquote payroll or not? And then how do I make them feel a part of the team? And Carly, you and I have done this with the podcast. We've done this in other areas. You've seen me do this where it's like, I don't care if your paycheck comes from my organization or not. You're on this team. And so the best effective leaders create relationships with partners that are marked by high expectations, just like I would have a high expectation for somebody on my team, trust, and then treating them as a part of the extended team.
I'm really glad you said high expectations, because I think sometimes we think when we have to build strong relationships, we can no longer have tough conversations with our vendors, right? Like everything has to be great. But really, that's not the case. Actually, if the relationship is stronger, you can have even higher expectations because there's that relational capital there. And then I think oftentimes, just like in your personal life, if you have a relationship with someone, they want to do even better for you because there's a relationship there that isn't just surface level.
Yeah. Yeah. And every organization has a different culture, but it can really go south if you treat, just like you would treat an internal staff member. One, I hope you have high expectations for your internal staff, for example. You would have the same for your partners. And so it's really treating vendors, air quote, as partners. And then the other thing I love to do, and I'm a big fan of just having good, smooth working relationships, but I'll do like the working genius with the partners that I work with. I have one, for example, that I work with. And she and I had a couple of meetings and it was going fine, but it was like, to me, there was something we hadn't quite clicked into like awesome partner mode. And so we did Working Genius, Carly, and I realized her Working Genius, for those of you that know Working Genius, we won't describe it all here, but if you do, you'll understand what I'm about to say, which is her Working Genius is that I was treating her as, like I was thinking in this partner relationship was, could you help enable and enablement and tenacity, can you help me get stuff done, basically? Well, we did Working Genius, and she is invention and galvanizing.
Oh, that's different.
And I was like, that explains a lot. And that has completely transformed the way we work with each other. So now, instead of coming to a meeting and saying, hey, so here's what I'd like you to do, I'm now coming to before the meeting saying, hey, here's what we're going to talk about. Could you come with 5 ideas for how to do X? Mm-hmm. Because I understand her. Now, she's not a W-2 employee. She's a partner, but I treat the team member with that kind of respect, and just like I would a team member. So still high expectations, but now I'm going to invest the effort to help really make sure that relationship is effective.
Yeah, I also did, it wasn't Working Genius, but something similar like that with a vendor, which was really helpful because then I was like, that's the reason that they act like that. And it just kind of opens that up.
And that's the reason I act like that too.
Exactly.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so we're on the last one. So just to repeat for our listeners, you've got Number one is understand how to move from data to strategy. Habit number two is find what's working and do more of that. Habit number three is leverage your natural resources. Number four is manage the present while inventing the future. Number five, act with courage and take calculated risks. And number six, bring out the best out of your partners. And the final habit for highly effective nonprofit leaders is they maintain a learning posture. Have you ever encountered a leader who is highly experienced, incredibly smart, and at the same time is curious and constantly asks questions, seeks to learn, and is humble? Like for me, Carly, I've sat down with some of those leaders and I'm like, why are you asking all of the questions? You should be the one, sharing your wisdom with the group or with me or whatever. And there's just something about leaders that are humble, they're teachable. Stephen Covey, another author, writes this idea of seeking first to understand and then to be understood. I don't know if it's like they have a security about them of who they are and they're okay with that. I don't know what it is, Carly, but I do know when I see it, that humble, curious, learning attitude. And so that seventh habit is effective fundraisers, effective nonprofit leaders are humble, teachable, and have a never-ending desire to learn and to grow.
I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but one of my favorite books that I read when I was starting my career was Rookie Smarts. And it's all about this idea of keeping the mindset of a rookie, which is continually learning, right? When you first start a job, you're like asking questions, you're taking small risks, you don't know anything, you have no preconceived notions or experience. When you get to that point where you start saying things like, oh yeah, we tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work, like you've lost your rookie smarts. You're now a veteran and like you won't even take a new chance, where that rookie's like, well, let's try it again. Like, I don't, what's it going to do? And so the whole book is about how to change your mindset back to that rookie idea, how you can be a veteran, but still have that rookie mindset. And that's what this makes me think of. It's like this continual learning, like, hey, yeah, we did try it 5 years ago, but let's try it again. Like things have changed, like just being more open and learning. So I highly recommend that book. It's such a good reminder. And I hate when I find myself saying things like, well, we did that and it didn't work. And then I'm like, okay, no, let's try it again.
Carly, I was thinking about it. I am the most alive when I feel like I'm just out of my depth. Like now there's a difference between being, 6 feet under, right? And being just out of your depth. And we've talked about that actually in a previous episode, this idea of playing up and having to play to a new level. And I don't know about you, but I'm the most alive when I have to be learning, because it's like, man, what do I not know? We've talked about it before and we'll talk about it in future episodes, but I've got a book coming out, Carly, we'll talk about later. But I was freaked out writing that book thinking, but there's so much more I need to know. Now, I've been doing that topic for 20 years and I've been researching it for 3 and writing it for 2. So it's not that I don't know, but I hope I always have that attitude of like, but what don't I know?
Yeah.
Like, what do I need to learn? And I hope that our listeners can benefit from that.
Yeah. Well, I think these 7 habits were great. I think for those listening, I hope you took away 1 or 2 that you're like, yeah, I've nailed that one, but that one I really need to work on. Whether you're in the nonprofit space or the for-profit space, I hope there's just a little nugget there for you to take away. And if you want to read the whole piece that Dave wrote about this, we'll link it in the show notes. It's one of Dave's Wave reports, which you can subscribe to as well. We'll link that too. So you can check that out and read the whole thing if you want. Otherwise, thanks for listening this week, and we'll see you on our next episode.
We're grateful for our partners this season, including Virtuous, a software company committed to helping nonprofits grow generosity. Faith Search Partners, an executive search firm specifically for faith-based organizations. And Imago Consulting, an advisory firm that helps nonprofits and businesses grow through innovation. For more episodes, find us wherever you get your podcasts and be sure to subscribe so that you're always up to date. We'd love it if you would rate the show and leave us a review. Your feedback is valuable to us. Follow the show on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at our website at purposeandprofitpodcast.com. You can also sign up for our email newsletter to get updates whenever we launch a new episode. Thanks for listening.